Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Growth Show and The One Big Question. I'm joined again with David Berkeley and Tom Pickering. And this week we are going to go deep into the dangers of values-based recruitment. So, David, what do you see as some of the dangers of values-based recruitment?
It's two things. One, that the companies don't actually live out the values themselves. So you're recruiting somebody for a set of values that aren't actually operational within your business. They're aspirational as opposed to practical embedded in the business, and things that they just sort of sound nice and things that we should say. For example, most businesses say one of our values is integrity. Well, duh, because you think you should say that you shouldn't employ people who don't have integrity. Like, do you really need to articulate that? The problem is they then don't really articulate what integrity means in their business, which is the second problem. That often the values, we're not actually talking about values, we're talking about behaviours. So values drive our beliefs, which then drive behaviours. So we can articulate these wonderful values, but they're not actually linked to the end behaviours that companies want to see. And then you get into a whole lot of trouble because everyone's talking about the underlying value through their own filters of how they see the world, thinking they're being congruent with that value, but not actually giving the behaviours that want in an organisation. And then people say, well, I don't really fit the values. Well, no, you don't fit the behaviours. That's what we're actually talking about. Those are two of the big problems that I see.
Yeah, and Tom, would you agree with that?
Yeah, a slightly different perspective, which I think is healthy. I think that the challenge is whether or not we're unleashing potential or leashing potential. And what do I mean by that? I think, what enables us as human beings to perform at our best is actually acknowledgement of who we are and an understanding of who we are. And actually, I think it's important also to understand that everybody's unique, and we don't neatly fit into boxes. So any attempt to compartmentalize, people's personalities or really, I don't think it's very helpful at all. And I think actually, I've immobilized all kinds of interesting situations in the past, very counterintuitively, with trade unions and others in very adverse circumstances by giving people opportunities, for example, they never would have had before. And I've actually quite often been reprimanded by CEOs for that. Because these people don't fit with the values, yet they're obviously part of the team, and actually trade unions, for example, are a very influential part of the team. So I think I just reiterate a couple of the points that David made, which is these labels fundamentally are a bit of a problem because they create what I describe as a tyranny of tolerance. So if you have a value such as not being offensive to each other, actually there's a distinct danger you're going to avoid having difficult conversations. And I think it's actually these labels actually create blind spots and they actually shut down communication. And actually that's exactly what you don't need in a situation like this, where this whole issue around racism and this awful situation in the States actually is all about understanding people and having open dialogue in a way that maybe we haven't had in the past. So, and actually there's a very fine dividing line when you start shutting down dialogue. The only other option is actually very dramatic, and it's one of two things. It's either subversion, right? Silent subversion in an organization, or in fact violence ultimately. And actually that sounds awful, but actually in difficult situations, unfortunately, look at what's happened in the States. This is all fueled around, this generalization that's been created, which has the great danger of creating a label that all of a sudden people like ourselves are white supremacists, which is a distortion, and then people tend to look for facts. And actually, the same thing can happen in organisations. And specifically VW, for example, they had a big problem, as everybody knows, with the emissions scandal, and their values were free expression and valuing teamwork. When in fact, again, that creates a blind spot, because, as David said, you actually don't need to say these things, Nick. they're obvious. It's far more to do with engaging with each other productively and encouraging free expression, and taking active interest in diversity, and actually thinking, fantastic, somebody has a different opinion, rather than trying to compartmentalize them into a box, because the consequences of that, from my experience, are quite dramatic.
Yeah. And David, isn't part of the issue here that these values are always driven from the top? Like, surely the values of a business are already in place. Like, people already have an idea what they are, rather than this sort of aspirational idea of what they should be.
Yeah, again, I'm going to steal something from Tom here, because Tom always says, if you tell somebody what to do, they never end up doing it. And I think this is a lot of the problem. Sometimes the problem I've had with, to generalize, some problems that people find with embedding values is that people go, these are the values that I want everyone else to have. So this is what I want my business to look like. So you go and make it happen. And like, well, if you're not embodying those values as a leader of that business, or a leader in that business, why would anybody else? So if you're talking about, putting the team first, but actually it's all about, you making your bonus, then that's going to create an intrinsic problem within that team, within that group. And so for any set of values, you have to have buy-in in them, and that starts at the top, but has to be engaged with everybody throughout that team. You can never be a top-down, this is what our values are, get on board with it, or get off. You have to have that engagement, and people have to understand the why that those things are in there, and you have to be open to it. So I was speaking with a CEO of a company the other day, and one of their values was integrity. They had a big business decision, and she said something in a management meeting. There was a junior person in the room said, sorry, how does that fit with integrity of our business? And there was that sort of deathly silence across the room, as everyone sort of was like, oh my word, you've just challenged the king, what's going to happen? And she said she was fuming in the moment, really embarrassed and angry and all those kind of things. She said when she got home, she reflected on it and thought, actually, you know what, that's the team working really well, when those things can be challenged. And I've got to have the humility to say, yeah, you're right, I did the wrong thing, thank you so much, because then it creates that positive reinforcing loop. But if you say those things and then the behaviors don't back it up, there's no, it'll have anarchy very, very quickly.
And Tom, there seems a culture of some of the best people in the market not getting sometimes jobs based on values or culture. I don't know how you really assess people's values for a detailed interview process. I know you guys are better equipped to sort of do that. Do you think there's a danger that sort of culture is dictating hiring too much?
Yeah, I think it's actually exactly the opposite of what's intended. So I think it's actually exclusive. It's actually shutting a lot of good people out. And so I think there's to test someone's values, Nick. There's two things you can do. Well, I think there's two different aspects of it. One is to ask them about the future. So for example, what does a good company culture look like? And also, hold on a minute, just get rid of this. Excuse me. So what does a good company culture look like? And what does a good work environment look like? And people will actually tell you what their values are. And I think what's far more important is about relationships. How if we're going, it's about direction. And also when we ask someone that type of question, they'll tell you some interesting things actually. The challenge is, are we moving in the right direction? And that question will flush that out, but it'll also flush out values. And then the challenge is, having embarked on that journey, can you manage relationships? And in difficult situations, relationships are entirely dependent on people saying what they feel. And the minute you start shutting down dialogue, particularly in difficult situations, you get some very unpredictable results. And the worst thing that can be created is silence. There's a second thing which I think matters a great deal, which is self-awareness. And I think one of the things to test with self-awareness, because no one's the finished article, is actually to ask somebody, what support do they need in the role, and that then fleshes out, the sort of all-knowing type individual, but also their self-awareness. Now, how do they see themselves? So I think those are two. So I think it's about direction, Nick. It's about relationships, and it's also about leadership behaviour. So I agree with what David said, but actually I think if you take an organisation like Ineos, Ineos actually, because it depends. I think to a degree it depends what the so-called values are. So Ineos have got some interesting values which are around grit, rigour, humour, and manners, which are quite specific and are moderately helpful. But even if you've got something like manners, okay, there will be times when people actually are really quite angry about something, and actually you want them to throw their manners down the loo because you want to hear what they've got to say. And so there's, even with these types of statements, or maybe someone isn't feeling particularly humorous, it's very important to understand the implications of these statements. So there's definitely some very bad ones, which are the broad generalizations, which are things like avoiding offence. Offence is a really big challenge. Those really broad statements, when they get more specific, I think they're more helpful. I think the other thing is, if you take the boss of Ineos, a guy called Jim Radcliffe, he's an exceptional leader. He just, so there's no and actually everybody follows the boss. So it actually not much needs to be said in that organisation. People are pretty clear about the way the thing operates. And to be honest, it's exactly as David said earlier, that you have these, if you get these statements wrong, which most of them are absolute nonsense. I mean, I've always ignored them completely whenever I've worked in large organisations, and absolute nonsense. But you get these statements, and the challenge then is the awareness of people then trying to fit their behaviours, including the senior management, into this, when they don't necessarily help the senior management either. So I think the sort of behaviour training classes actually have exactly the opposite effect, when in fact the answer is to give people space, treat them as individuals, value them for who they are, acknowledge them for who they are, and frankly give them opportunities to do work in their own way. And give, and I think a large part of this is just giving people the opportunities, and every aspect of values and indoctrination of this type. I think very subtle divided line between a real overarching arrogance. Because I mean, put it another way, I mean, who actually sets values? I mean, it's a sort of godlike thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm quite concerned about the Chinese culture, the Chinese businesses at the moment. So, simply because they don't do business on the same terms whatsoever. They have a totally different view of human rights and other things. And actually, should a Chinese business be allowed to set values in a European context? I don't know. I mean, who is uniquely qualified to set these godlike statements? The whole thing is quite tyrannical. I think that's why these bland statements actually create a tyranny of tolerance, because liberalism, actually, oddly enough, creates a tyranny. So
yeah, I always saw the issues around values more about the journey. I mean, like you said, just saying like, this is what we are now. I think surveying your team to find out what they believe the values of this business is today. And a more interesting question is like, what do you want the values of the business to be in the future, and how we can get a roadmap to make that happen. And at least, there's some directional play going on there, some kind of actual unity in what you're doing, rather than this blanket statement, which becomes a joke internally. People walk past their values plastered on a wall and just sort of smutter at it, right? And it actually becomes a focal point of what the company's not doing, unless they are truly living their values. But in most businesses, to truly live the certain values we see, which are all the same, is impossible. Like there's always going to be moments of deviation in any business when they have to make decisions that will be deemed one way or the other. David, what would you say if you were going to take someone on a journey of like trying to establish their cultural hiring or their values-based hiring? What would you be saying to them right now?
Really good question, and I think probably just go back to your last statement. I imagine this, COVID situation has actually revealed a lot of the cultural problems in businesses, because you always see who's wearing swimming costumes when the tide goes out, and when there's a crisis, which this undoubtedly is for many people, that's when the sort of culture and everything is really, really tested to the max, and that's where you see the sort of problems emerging. I think it would be more about looking at character, and that's what some of the things that I really encourage my clients to look at the character of people. Are they people who you'd want to be in a crisis with? Are they going to flap and cause problems, or are they going to be problem solvers? Are they going to tell you what they think you want to hear, or are they going to tell you what is actually going on? Character. You often have people who've got a bit of character about them have often been through some pretty tough times. They're often people you'd want to build businesses around and build teams around, because they've really gone through some things, they've really learned and grown, and they're far more useful in a far greater range of business environments. So I think people's character is something to really, really look at when hiring, because some of the value statements that come out can be quite generic, can be quite general, and so it's just really getting past that and looking at the person and going, is this person going to be a good fit for what we're trying to do? Are they functional for the purpose that we want from them?
Yeah, and I think character is a great one. I've always liked attitude. Like, what is the attitude of this business? So, for example, you go into certain cultures and winning is almost a dirty word in certain places, like the culture of liking to win. You can really find people who really actually enjoy being successful, pushing on, and others who almost don't want to be in those sort of environments. And I think understanding what is the attitude of your team, like what is the bit that actually gets them going, and making that a focus point is great, because everyone can also work towards an attitude. If it's a work ethic, if it's a supportive culture. I've always enjoyed sort of focusing on those attributes, like what is the attitude of this business, and it usually unveils a few really interesting things. Tom, what else has sort of worried you about this whole sort of cultural hiring or sort of values-based hiring?
Yeah, I think it's really, if an organisation's made up of individuals, Nick, and those individuals have got specific needs, and I think the challenge is, what's the environment that enables us to perform at our best? And that is about acknowledging us for who we are, rather than somebody else's values. And I think it's about, are we all going in the same direction? And the counterintuitive thing is, if you actually want people to go in the same direction, I think you give them space and opportunity and support, and frankly love as well, to help them along that journey. And I think any sort of labels, you have to be very careful of labels. I think there are some positive actions that people can take. Putting other people first, not labeling things, recognizing generalizations, stasis. There are some really practical things, and also encouraging new action. And I think that manifests itself in what does good look like? I think it's an organization that's taking new action. Because if you've got values, you're actually restricting, you're potentially shutting down innovation almost completely. And to test a new idea, it's only as good as, the way most of our ideas technically are flawed. When they come into our heads, they're normally wrong. And actually what checks our ideas is our interaction with other people. So the team interaction and the health of that. And actually, is it healthy? Am I really looking out for you, Nick, or is it all about me? Those sorts of things really matter. So I think it's those sorts of things that really matter. And there's some actions you can take. So I think so. It's about taking new action. The signs of this: taking new action, having fun, high energy. David and I talked about energy before. People who haven't got energy, I think, are misaligned. Their actions and their beliefs are out of sync, and that's very stressful. Because that's the challenge with trying to fit people into these boxes. Even if you call it character or attitude, I get what you're saying, but it means something to you. But I'm not sure. Let's think, actually, have I got the same character as Nick? So there's all kinds of things that go through people's heads, which may or may not be helpful. So I think the more specific they can be, and I think there are some specific things that organisations can do, but I think it comes down to direction. Are we going in the right direction? And can we manage relationships? And that's far more to do with the way we engage with each other. So if you say something to me, Nick, do I label you as being not fitting, the conflict box, or not being nice to people box, or whatever? Or am I really interested in what you've just said, Nick, and actually what matters to you? Because if I want to get the best out of you, if I acknowledge you for who you are, and I take a real interest in you to really understand where you're coming from, if it's completely diametrically opposed to me, actually that's normally where the money is. So I think these systems, it comes back to, are we leashing people or unleashing people? Because I think the more mature society gets, the more we try to leash things. And the United States has been success of the United States economy in the life of Warren Buffett. Earnings have gone up 6 times in the life of Warren Buffett, and that is purely around unleashing people. So I remember going to the States doing some sales quite a long time ago, and in the UK, it was making money or winning, as you said earlier, is a bit of a rude word. The guy in the States I spoke to said, "Look, hey Tom, you want to make money? I want to make money. How are we going to make money?" So it's like a, nice simple logic. So, and I'd hardly met the bloke. It was just pretty much the first thing he said. So I think this is really important that we get this right, Nick, to create healthy cultures. And we've got, I don't profess to have the answer to this, but I've seen a lot of things go very difficultly wrong. As David just said, it's actually the test of this is when things get difficult. All right, this is the challenge. So you can bumble along with lots of nice values, but trust me, the values will fall to pieces when things get a bit difficult. And I think even if things are, okay, actually there's always some sort of cycle where organisations go through. So I don't think it's a time for complacency. So I think it's a good time to challenge this.
Yeah. And do you think from a board level standpoint that rather than seeing it as we want all of you guys to be more like this, seeing it more as along the lines of these are the things you should hold us accountable for more as a team? Because I think that's where it gets really powerful when you're going, if we're not doing this as a management team, you can be all over us, like we're committing to this. Because otherwise you might as well just stick them on your website and not talk about internally, and you're fine. Yeah. And just focus more on your mission statement. Yeah. David, do you agree with that, or am I a little bit off the pace there?
No, I think that's right. I think it's where I've seen it done really well is it's like a stick of rock at the beach. That wherever you go in an organisation, you should see the things that you want to be saying. And so often, you see people saying respect for people or something, and someone holds a door open for the CEO, they don't even say thank you. You're like, well, hang on a minute. So you felt we haven't even, we're not even in the meeting yet, and already we're love 40 down here. You want to see it anywhere through an organisation. You see that those things that you're trying to embody being played out. And I think it is harder being in a management team, in a leadership team, because you really have to embody it. Because if you're not, then, as you said, why would anybody else do it? And that's where leadership can be really, really hard and really lonely. So a lot of my clients, it's the tricky for them that it's a lonely place running a business. It really is. You have very few people to talk about things, and everyone's looking at you with thinking you've got all the answers and everything else. And that can be under severe pressure. At times like this, if you're saying this is what we should be doing, the right things, ethical business, whatever it is. And then an opportunity comes along when you know that your business is really struggling and you need that cash, you need that deal to come through. You've just got to go into a slight ethical, moral grey area. That's where it's going to really hold up. That's where everyone's going to be watching you. Because if you do it, then they'll go, well, that's free license for everybody else.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on after you.
I was just going to say, years ago, somebody said, I'm working on a policy document for sort of business ethics, banking ethics for one of the big banks. Do you want to be involved? Do you want to come involved in this? There's absolutely no chance. why would I bother doing that? Because at some point, it goes, yeah, but it'll be a great logo for your website. It's a top whatever bank and blah blah blah. Great, but everybody knows in that bank you can talk about ethics, you can talk about doing the right thing, you can talk about ethical banking, all that kind of stuff. Everyone knows if you had a tip for an insider trade that you knew you didn't think you were going to get caught for, the vast majority of the time they take that tip and they make the money because you're based on the end results, not on doing the right thing. So if you don't take that tip, you go to your boss and say, yeah, didn't do it. This opportunity came up, but I didn't do it because it wasn't the right thing to do. He's going to go, great, you cost us 10 million, 100 million, 200 million, whatever it is. You're based on the wrong things that's driving the values that are set. And I think that's where businesses need to work much harder at rewarding and recognizing when those cultural things are put in place and highlighting them to really weave them in. That really builds them into a fabric. If it's just the things that we go, well, this is just how we are, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, no, totally. Guys, again, thank you so much for your time today on this. We've had loads of people writing in, and thank you for all the messages. If you want to do a sort of team Zoom or anything like that at some point, let us know. If you want to explore a few of these details, or if you've got some more questions you want to ask our panel, let's get them involved there. Quite a lot to sort of take away and process from that. We're trying to do these sort of short, sharp, and punchy for you. So there's loads more we're going to continue talking about sort of off camera around this topic. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all soon. All the best. Goodbye.